multinational corporation is able to get the best of both sides of the coin, because they can treat it one way in another country and treat it another way in another. I've seen this in the Netherlands. It's very popular. You can get, debt treatment in the Netherlands, or I think it's equity treatment in the Netherlands, but debt treatment in the U.S. So you can get, favorable things in both countries. But we're not going to spend much time on this in this class. So let's turn to Code Section 385. Okay, so let's look at Code Section 385 in our book, our code book. Okay. Treatment of certain interest in corporations as stock or indebtedness. The Secretary is authorized to prescribe such regulations as may be necessary or appropriate to determine whether an interest in a corporation is to be treated as stock or indebtedness. Okay? Treasury Department, make regulations. The regulations under this section shall set forth factors which shall be taken into account. The factors that should be taken into account are whether there is an unconditional promise to pay, whether there is subordination, ratio of debt to equity, convertibility into stock of the holding company, stock of the corp, the relationship between holdings of the stock and holdings of the interest in question. Again, we're seeing these same factors again. So, the question you might be thinking of is, okay, well, were there ever any regulations made by the Treasury Department? We have Congress asking the Treasury Department to make regulations. In 1980, some proposed regulations came out, but they were withdrawn in 1983. However, last October, we've been waiting a long time, as you can see, like 25 years. No, wait, longer than that, 35 years, almost 40 years for these regulations, and they have come out. So in October 2017 they were finalized, and it is 1.385-1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, these regulations are not in my little book here. Honestly, I doubt they are going to be in the new book that comes out this summer. They might be. We'll just have to wait and see. But they're not in my current version of the book. But you are not expected to read these regulations. They are actually very long and very confusing. When they were proposed, I have a friend at PwC, and he helped write a comment letter on behalf of PwC for these new regulations, and his comment letter was 200 pages long. So these regulations are extensive, and they were meant to combat inversions. So an inversion is when we have a corporation, a U.S. corporation basically, and they basically invert it to a foreign corporation through some sort of a merger. There's different ways you can go about doing it, but they invert it to a foreign corporation to avoid paying U.S. taxes. So these regulations were initially created to combat inversions. We are not talking about inversions in this class. That would be something that is covered, in an advanced international class, not even a basic international class. So, these regs they're actually a lot broader than what the initial intention was. There's been a lot of uproar in the tax community amongst these regs. I've even heard talk at conferences about potentially getting rid of the regs. So we don't really know how much longer they'll be here. They may be here to stay, I don't know. But the interesting thing about these regs, if you actually read the regs, they don't talk about these factors at all. Not at all. Crazy, right? That's one reason why people were in such uproar. We've been using these common law factors for like 40 years. And for them to just not mention them at all Well, what the crap does that mean? They look at a number of other things. I don't have it in my notes. But a lot of the things they look at is ownership of the parties, because a lot of what they're looking at here is big multinational corporations. But if you look at the preamble for these regulations, the preamble is not actually part of the regulations, but it is a big a description, okay, that was written by the, usually the Joint Committee on Taxation writes the preamble, but they explain the regulations. In the preamble, which is not short in and of itself, let me say, in the second or third page of the preamble, it does say that these factors are still relevant and still useful. So what that means is, in normal type situations, we're still going to use the same factors. If you have something that involves multinational corporations with international components, you need to get familiar with these new regs. I haven't spent a whole lot of time reading them yet, admittedly, but I'm sure it's coming. I'm kind of hoping they'll get rid of them before I have to spend a ton of time reading 100 pages of regs. And I've even read summaries of the regs, and it's still, even the summaries can be a little bit overwhelming for them. So we'll just wait and see on these regs. But you're not responsible for knowing the content of these regs in this class. They are not in the book, for one thing, because at the time that this book came out, and this book is very new, these regs were not finalized. So these factors still very much in use. That's what we're going to focus on. So let's take a look at a problem, the problem on page 145. Okay, so in this problem, let me erase, because I don't have a lot of room to write on this board, I'm going to have to erase the factors, okay? I tell you what I'll do. I'll put them right over here. I'll put form, debt equity, intent, proportionality, subordination. I think that's it. Make sure. Yeah, that's it. Okay. So let's look at a problem here. Problem on page 145. So we have Aristocrat, Baker, and Chef, and they have formed Che Guevara, Inc. So we have shareholders A, B, and C. This is supposed to be a square. And they have formed Che's Corporation. All right. It's a C Corp. They're going to operate a bakery and restaurant. Okay? It was previously owned by Chef as a sole proprietorship. Aristocrat is going to contribute $80,000 in cash. Okay? We have Baker, who's contributing a building with a fair market value of 80 and a basis of 20. And then we have Chef, who is contributing $40,000 in cash and $40,000 worth of goodwill. And of course, the goodwill has a fair market value of $40,000, but a zero basis. All right, so these are what the shareholders are going to contribute. Ches requires at least $1.8 million of additional capital in order to renovate the building. acquire new equipment and provide working capital. It has negotiated a $900,000 loan from Friendly National Bank on the following terms. Interest will be payable at 2 points above the prime, determined semi-annually, with principal due in 10 years, and the loan will be secured by a mortgage on the renovated restaurant building. So, with that loan from Friendly National Bank, do you guys think there's any issues on the face of that? Is that really going to be debt here, this loan? Honestly, no. There's not going to be any issues with this. It's with a third-party lender. It has 2 points above prime. It's secured by the building. There's no question this loan is going to be a good loan. We are not evaluating, that loan. It looks fine, okay? But let's look. So remember, they need $1.8 million of funds. Okay, so that loan from the bank is $900,000. So we want to evaluate their proposals to get the additional funding that they need. Okay, A, B, and C each will loan Ches Corp $300,000, and each will take back a $300,000 5-year corporate note with variable interest payable at 1 point below the prime, determined annually. Now, what I like to do on these kind of problems is kind of draw out the balance sheet of the company, which honestly we really need to do because one of the factors, if you will remember, is debt to equity. Well, to be able to figure that out, we have to know the balance sheet, right? Okay, so the first thing they're going to have as an asset is going to be their cash. All right, so how much cash do they have here? Okay, well, they have $900,000 in cash from the bank, plus $80,000 from A, and $40,000 from C. So that is $1,920,000. They have a building, right? Because B contributed a building. And that building, actually, let's put here, we have our basis. We have our fair market value. Obviously, cash is going to have the same basis as fair market value. With the building, it has a basis of $20,000 and a fair market value of $80,000. Now, what about the goodwill? Okay, goodwill has a 0 basis, right, and a $40,000 fair market value, which gives us total fair market value of $2,040,000. All right, now let's look at our liabilities here. Liabilities and equity. So we have Friendly Bank. They have a loan for $900,000. Okay, now with alternative A, they're each A, B, and C are going to also loan $300,000 apiece to the company. So now we have shareholder loans. Capital S, capital H is shareholder of $900,000, which is basically going to give our common stock a value of the difference because they have to balance of $240,000. Okay. So total debt, total equity. All right. So let's evaluate alternative A, which remember, we have each shareholder loaning $300,000 with a 5-year note at 1 point below the prime, determined annually. All right, so let's look first at form. Any issues here with form, with alternative A? Well, it is a loan. They say it's a loan. Yeah, they say it's a loan. But it is 1 point below the prime. Is that enough to make it be reclassified as equity? Probably in itself, probably not. I don't know. It just depends upon the courts. Either way, it does not look like a great factor for them. Okay, we also have Let's look at debt to equity. So what's our debt to equity ratio here? Sorry, looking at the wrong page. So our total debt is 1.8 million, right? Total debt, 1.8 million. And our total equity is 240,000. Trying to get the number in here, what that equals, which is approximately 7.5 to 1. Is that enough? Again, it depends upon the industry, it depends upon the courts, it just depends. Now again, like I said, sometimes courts aren't sure. Do we want to use just outside debt, or do we consider both inside and outside debt? So if we were only going to include inside debt, then it's going to be, a different number. I'm trying to find the number here in this answer key. Sorry. 900, which would be 900,000, which gives us a debt to equity ratio of 3.75 to 1. So depending upon if we're only using, if we're going to use all debt, or if we are only going to use inside debt, then we would get different ratios here. Okay, now let's look at intent. We don't have a lot on intent here. We can assume that they intended it to be a loan. We don't have a lot on hindsight. What about proportionality? This is the damning factor here, because they're all three equal shareholders and they're all three making equal loans to the corporation. Honestly, this factor alone would be enough to kill this loan and say, nah, this is equity, okay? But especially when you look at it in conjunction with these other factors, it's definitely going to be equity. Let's look at B. Same as A above, except that each of the parties will take back $300,000 of 10% 20-year subordinated income debentures. Interest will be payable only out of the net profits of the business. Okay, interesting. So now this goes to the factor of intent, or form. It could really go to either one. Because what's happening now? Now the interest payments are only payable out of profits. That's a huge problem. Big no-no. Absolutely. This is equity, not debt. Look at C. Same as A above, except that the $900,000 loan will be unsecured, but personally guaranteed by A, B, and C, who will be jointly and severably liable. So what this question is trying to get at is, okay, we still have the terms in A where we still have all three of them contributing, this $300,000 toward a loan. But this one looks at is we're saying now what we're doing is we don't have any outside debt. It's all going to be inside debt. So our debt to equity ratio is going to be, that 1.8 million, which is approximately that 7.5 to 1, etc. Ooh, that looks really bad. Okay, that makes it look worse for even the debt that was given by the bank. So that could even make this bank debt not so good. Okay, look like equity. Probably not enough in my opinion, but it does make it look a little bit damning. Now let's look at D. Aristocrat will loan the entire $900,000, taking back a note with terms identical to described in A above. Okay, honestly, this one probably looks okay, because now we just have A loaning the entire $900,000. Proportionality, no longer an issue. Debt to equity ratio is the same. What about form? Is that 1% below prime going to be enough to reclassify this loan as equity? Probably not. Okay, probably not. You're probably going to be okay with this loan. Look at E. Same as D above, except that commencing 2 years after the incorporation, Ches ceases to pay interest on the notes because of a severe cash flow problem. So what factor is this blowing? Intent. Hindsight. Remember, we can use hindsight. So in 2 years later, they're not paying it because they don't have the cash flow. So that makes it seem like equity. All right, so that's it on that problem. I'm going to hit stop and we'll come back.